Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of With Fire and Sword by Andrea Matthews. Join me. Chapter 1, October 3rd, 1538. A ray of sunshine hit Walt in the eye, but not before he was able to parry Sim Armstrong's blade. Blinking, he looked across the Barmkin yard. Swords clashed around him, wielded by Foster and Armstrong alike, along with various others of their respective kith and kin. He rubbed the lump on the back of his head, certain he was waking from one nightmare only to step into another. One of the filthy dogs must have knocked him out for a bit. Sam came at him again, and Walt blocked the blade once more. As he did, he spotted his sister Mary, standing dazed by his side. God's teeth, what are you doing out here, lass? She gazed about, rubbing her eyes. I have no idea. She looked down to see a bucket of water and strips of linen in her hand. Ah, what's wrong with me? I must have been gathering wool, and Rory in need of tending and all. He's taken a bad slash to the leg. She glanced at Walt, her brow crinkled in a frown. You've a fierce clow on the back of your head yourself. It'll need tending as well. Ah, dinna fash yourself, lass. Get along and see to Rory, eh? I'll be fine. You're always telling me how thick me head is, are you not? I'll have to agree with you there. Sim Armstrong stood with his arms folded, waiting patiently to continue their fight. Mary let a smile catch the corner of her mouth. I best not find out you did this, Sim Armstrong. She dabbed a wet rag on Walt's wound, and he winced a bit, much to his annoyance. Hard head or no, we cannot have what little brain ye have in there leaking out now, can we? Are you done then, sister? We were in the middle of something here, you know. She rolled her eyes. There, it does not look to be needing any stitches. See if you can keep it that way, eh, brother? She threw a glance in Sim's direction. And ye as well, I reckon. With that, she picked up her bucket and hurried off toward Roy. Walt made a dismissive sound, but he turned back to find Sim grinning like a demented polecat. Are ye finished blithering with your sister, then? The man said. Kind of ye to wait, but if you'll just give me another minute, I'd like to check on Dennis and Will. Sim shrugged. Dennis is over there sparring with me cousin Douglas. No fear there. That lad's all but useless. And Will's over yon with Hobbs' nephew, Nebulous Ned. His name attests to his skill with the sword, so I doubt you've little to fash yourself over there either. He sighed in relief, for his brother did seem to be holding his own against Nebulous Ned Rutherford. Then, out of nowhere, Dillon shouted to Will, the alarm in his voice causing Walt's blood to run cold. Ian Rutherford was coming up behind Will, likely preparing to stab him in the back. Walt was far too away to be of any help, but no, Will had heard Dillon's warning and spun around to dispatch the wretched backstabbing lout. Walt said a quick prayer of thanksgiving, though it seemed like hours, it had only been a few seconds. Sim grabbed him by the shoulder. Between ye and me, I cannot say I'm aggrieved. Andy never trusted that scoundrel. Then why start a blood feud over it, man? Ah, you know there's more to it than that. For by Gordy did arrange the marriage contract. 'Tis a matter of honor. How can it be a matter of honor with men that did not know what the word means? Sim stiffened, and Walt was quick to clarify his meaning. Calm yourself, lad. I was not speaking of Gordy, but them Rutherfords. Sim nodded. You may have a point there, but still, Gordy wouldn't bring shame upon the Armstrong name. Now, can we get back to it? I've better things to be doing. The man came at him again, and Walt parried once more, lunging at the man, only to be thwarted himself. His mind was no longer on the fight, for just minutes earlier he had spied Will and Dillon heading for the undercroft. And so, after crossing swords for a few more times, Walt grew tired of Sim's persistence and decided to put an end to it. Using his foot, he kicked Sim in the bollocks and then hit him over the head with the hilt of his sword. Sleep well, man. Intent on finding out what his brother and Dillon were up to, he followed them around the tower to the undercroft, where he found Dillon crouched down near the doorway. What are you doing, man? Shite, Walt, Dillon said. Are you trying to give me an epilepsy? Shite? Is that what you're doing back here? No, I've finished, haven't I? He pushed past Walt, causing the man to chuckle. Me ma's not going to be happy if she steps in it. Well, I've no worry then, because I couldn't. He looked out toward Barmkin Yard. Are we really discussing this now? Walt grabbed Dylan by the collar and shoved him into the undercroft, slamming the door behind him. Aye, we are, laddie. Men did not usually fash over where they void themselves in the heat of battle. So happening you'd like to speak true about what you were up to. If you've done anything to harm our Annie. Walt raised his sword and Dylan swallowed, his Adam's apple feeling as if it had turned into a large stone. Harm her? I love her. I would die before I hurt her. Go on then, slice my throat if you will, but do not ever accuse me of harming my Annie. Lowering his sword, Walt leaned back against the door, a torch burning overhead, casting his face in shadows so that Dylan couldn't make out his expression. God, had he come this far to be skewered by Annie's eldest brother for doing nothing but trying to save Will? Tell me why you're looking about back here. Maybe he should just tell the truth, or as close to it as possible. I was helping Will and Maggie get away. They slipped out the hidden door in the Barmkin wall, the one behind the chapel, and headed to the southeast, away from here and away from the Armstrongs. Don't be angry with Will. He didn't want to leave, but he was worried about Maggie. Why would you think I'd be angry? I wish I'd thought of it myself. If the Armstrongs get hold of her, they're sure to drag her north, wedding or no. That union could be ended right enough with the flick of a sword or a bit of Jedburgh justice, as you well know. Dylan just nodded, afraid he sounded like a pubescent boy if he responded. But that still doesn't tell me what you were doing hunched over on the ground like the boogeyman was after your hide. Dylan hung his head. He needed to think fast, something clever. Walt was no slouch. My stomach was in such knots after I thought Ian had Will. You did good, lad, but did not fash yourself. After you were on the borders a bit, your way wouldn't trouble you so. Speak to Ma when we're through here. She'll give you a tonic to fix you right up. You won't be telling anyone about this, will you? No, unless I'm tippled. Walt slapped him on the back and opened the undercroft door. Right then, back out to the fray, eh? Dylan started out, but Walt stood a moment, rubbing the lump on his head. What is it? Dylan asked. Not more than wisps of a dream, I expect. Someone must have given me a good clout. He shook his head and motioned for Dylan to head back to the yard, slamming the undercroft door behind him. Dylan hurried back out to the Barmkin yard. Wisps of a dream. Weeks had passed in the 20th century, and he'd only just returned, back to the same battle he'd left. But had those same weeks passed here as well? Had time in fact rewound, and if so, were those wisps of a dream really memories that still lingered somewhere deep within Walt's consciousness? He shook his head, the concept too much for him to contemplate at the moment. Instead, he plunged back into the fray, picking up where Will had left off with Nebulous Ned. At last, the Armstrongs and the Rutherfords gathered their dead and wounded and headed north, once more leaving a path of destruction through the Barmkin yard. Duncan and Michael Foster were helping their brother Rory to the cottage. His bandaged leg was covered in blood, and a cold chill ran through Dylan. Had he read anything about Rory, a death record, a tombstone? He couldn't recall. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he looked across the smoke-filled Barmkin yard. The stable was in flames, as was the thatched roof on a storage building, though kith and kin had already started throwing water on it. At least they hadn't set fire outside to the Peel Tower door this time. Aside from Rory, the Fosters all seemed to be none the worse for wear, albeit battered and bruised here and there. But where was Annie? He started back toward the Peel Tower, his heart racing, pounding against his ribs. She had to be all right. Betty would have been watching out for her. Mary was rushing over toward the cottage to check on Rory, no doubt. Maybe Annie was there as well, but he'd no sooner taken 3 steps than he heard his name being called. His heart soared. Either he was dead and an angel had come to whisk him away, or it was his beloved Annie searching for him. Spinning around, he scanned the clouded yard once more, staring into the murky fog of the darkening sky until he saw her, coming to him like a guardian angel. Without wasting a minute, he ran to her, wrapping his arms around her. You're injured. She pulled away, plunging a rag into the pail of water she was carrying and wiping away the blood along his hairline. It does not look to be too bad, though. I'm afraid ye might have a nasty cloud there come the morning. Ack, and what have you done to your arm? I did nothing, mistress, but defend myself. I believe that was caused by another. Oh, Dylan. She wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was afraid I might have lost ye. She stood on her toes, kissing him longer and deeper than she had ever dared before, and he welcomed her embrace, lifting her from the ground and holding tight to her petite form. If he were to be whisked away by some cruel trick of time, he intended to take the memory of her touch with him. After a moment, she released his lips. You'd best put me down before one of my kin sees us. And what if they do? He was still here, standing in front of the woman he loved, and he had no intention of losing her again. A man cannot kiss his betrothed. Her eyes widened, and he cupped her cheeks, using his thumb to wipe away the tears. I love you, Annie Foster, far more than you know. Do you truly? Annie reached up and stroked the lump on his head, her fingers soft and tender against the aching wound. Marry me, Annie, and be my wife. Her hand dropped from his face and her breath caught. An ache gripped in his heart. Perhaps it was too soon, too much to ask of her. Well, it didn't matter. If she couldn't give herself to him just yet, he would wait until she could. But what if she didn't want him at all? His mouth felt like he'd swallowed a box of cotton wool. And then he'd become a priest or a mercenary, traveling the world until someone ended his pathetic life. For without her by his side, he was nothing. She stared down at the ground and bit her lip. Are you sure you're not bothered about me not being a virgin? Ian took that from me. What? Oh, Annie. He stepped close and hugged her once again and lifted her chin so that he could look into her dusky blue eyes. That means nothing to me. I'm not exactly pure as the driven snow. A rogue, I believe your mother called me. But you're my rogue, are you not? She looked at him, her expression filled with hope. I do not wish to say if it isn't so. Yours alone, always and forever, no matter where time carries us. You're an angel sent to save me from myself, a guiding light calling me home. Ian Rutherford took nothing from you, for he could not touch your heart. And there you are a virgin in every sense of the word. It is the heart I am in love with, and if you've any thought to my well-being, you'll not be trifling with my emotions and causing a wounded man to suffer any more. So I'll ask again, will you be my wife, Annie? I pledge to be true to only you. He pulled his dagger from its scabbard and pressed it to his heart. I swear it on my dagger, by heaven above me, and by my part of paradise, I will love only you. His heart was beating out a frantic drum solo, fearful that she might still turn him away, but her answer came at once. Throwing her arms around his neck, she kissed him once more before standing back, tears of what he hoped were joy streaming down her flawless cheeks. I, dear Dylan Hetherington, I will be your wife and love you like I have not loved other till death draws us apart. Dylan had just bent over to kiss her again when a voice echoed across the Barbican yard. And what, may I ask, is going on here? Betty handed a armful of bandages to her daughter. Go see the wounded now. But I am, Ma, Annie said, a twinkle in her eye. Dylan has a nasty wound on his arm. 'Twill need tending. I am sure it will, but there are others in more need. She put down her water pail and took a few bandages back from her daughter. I'll take care of this one. Off with ye now. Your sister will be needing those bandages. Annie gave Dylan a quick kiss on the cheek before hurrying off across the Barbican yard. Dylan could feel the heat surging into his cheeks. I'll be fine. It's nothing more than a scratch. He turned and started to walk away, but an iron-like claw gripped his arm, spinning him back around. Do you wish to tell me what exactly was going on here? And please do not tell me not. I was a young lass once myself, and I am not blind even now. No, he wanted to do this right, which meant he needed to talk to Graham Foster first. I mean no disrespect to you or Annie, mistress, but if you wouldn't mind, there is something I wish to speak to your husband of before I answer that question. She pulled her plaid tight around her shoulders, a smile fighting to erupt at the corner of her mouth. Is there now? Well, you'd best be about it then. With all that's happened here today, we'd welcome a bit of good news. Dylan gave a quick nod, happy to escape the woman's piercing gaze, but he found her hand not yet released from him. Is there anything else, mistress? She looked him up and down, clearly letting him know who was in charge of this conversation. Aye, there is. What have ye done with William and Maggie? What was he going to tell her? Not the truth, that was sure. But she was certain to spot a lie at 20 paces. Before he could say a word, though, she huffed a muffled curse, one he was convinced was not very ladylike. Spare me your lying tongue. Love them, though, as I do. I've raised a pack of rogues, and ye are no different. I can sense a tale in the making before it even reaches your lips. So save yourself the trouble, and speak the truth of it. Dylan swallowed hard, the cotton wool back in his mouth. Keep it simple, a lie, but not a lie. I sent them off toward Lancaster. They should be well on their way by now. Betty sighed, closing her eyes and nodding. 'Tis for the best, I reckon, though I will sore miss them. Without another word, she opened her eyes, releasing his arm and planting her hands on her hips. Well, what are you standing here gaping at? Do you not have some business with me, husband, you should be attending to? And stop by to have Annie attend to that wound when you're done. A rogue ye may be, but I will not have ye dying and breaking her heart. Dylan nodded and took off, glad to be on his way. He'd never been so happy in his life. Time had forged a new path toward the future and had not swept him off the 20th century or imprisoned him in the web of time. He was on terra firma, albeit 450 years in the past, but that was where his heart was, and he would gladly spend the rest of his life in Annie's embrace.